Emily Carter believed in the goodness of people. At 30 years old, she had built a simple but satisfying life as a receptionist at the Grandview Hotel, married to a man she thought she knew, and looking forward to building a family. She welcomed her husband's stepmother into their lives with open arms, grateful for the warmth of extended family. But some families hide secrets so twisted, so calculated, that discovering them doesn't just break your heart, it makes you question every moment of your existence. Emily was about to learn that the woman calling her daughter and the man calling her wife had been playing a game where she was never meant to win. This is the story of how she almost lost everything, including her sanity, and how she fought back from the edge of an abyss designed specifically for her. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning shift at the Grandview Hotel always began the same way. Emily Carter arrived at 6:30, 15 minutes before her shift started, because she believed punctuality reflected character. She would straighten her navy blazer, pin her name tag precisely 2 inches below her left shoulder, and take her position behind the polished marble reception desk. The hotel lobby smelled of fresh coffee and lilies, a combination that had become as familiar to her as breathing. Emily had worked at the Grandview for 5 years. She knew every regular guest by name, remembered their preferences, and took pride in making people feel welcomed. It was honest work, the kind that made her feel useful. Her colleague Marcus often joked that she was too good for the job, that she should have been managing the place by now. But Emily never saw it that way. She liked the simplicity of her role, checking guests in, solving problems, being the friendly face people remembered. Her husband David worked in corporate management at a tech firm downtown. They had met 6 years ago at a coffee shop near the hotel when he had accidentally grabbed her latte. The mix-up had led to conversation, then dinner, then a whirlwind romance that resulted in marriage within 18 months. David was charming in the way that successful men often are, confident, well-dressed, attentive when it mattered. He made decent money, enough that they had bought a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, the kind of place with a small yard and neighbors who waved when you pulled into the driveway. Their marriage had settled into a comfortable routine. David left for work before Emily, came home around 7, and they would share dinner while discussing their days. Weekends meant grocery shopping, Netflix, and occasionally dinner with friends. It was ordinary, in the best possible way. Emily had never been the type to crave excitement or drama. Stability felt like victory after growing up in a household where her parents argued more than they laughed. The change came on a Tuesday in September. David had mentioned his father was getting remarried. His parents had divorced when David was in college, more than a decade ago, and his father had remained single until now. The woman's name was Patricia Morrison, though she preferred to be called Trish. David described her as warm, elegant, and exactly what his father needed after years of loneliness. The wedding would be small, just immediate family, taking place at a vineyard 2 hours north. Emily had felt genuinely happy for David's father. She had only met him a few times. He lived across the country in Arizona, but he had always been kind to her. The idea of him finding companionship in his 60s felt heartening. She had bought a tasteful wedding gift and looked forward to the ceremony. But 3 days before the wedding, David's father suffered a minor heart attack. David had received the call while they were having breakfast. His face had gone pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, he explained that his father was stable, but needed to stay in the hospital for observation. The doctors were running tests. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. "I should fly out there," David said, already mentally packing. Of course, Emily had agreed. "I can take a few days off work if you want me to come with you." But David had shaken his head. No, you've used most of your vacation days. I'll just go for a couple of days, make sure he's okay, and come back." Trish is there with him anyway. She's been amazing through all this. Emily had felt a small pang of disappointment, but understood. She had kissed him goodbye at the airport and returned to her routine at the hotel. David had called every evening from Arizona. His father was recovering well. The heart attack had been minor, just a warning sign that he needed to take better care of himself. Trish had been at the hospital constantly, David reported, taking care of everything from coordinating with doctors to bringing his father homemade meals. She sounded like a saint. When David returned a week later, he had news. Trish wants to move closer to us, he announced as Emily drove them home from the airport. Not immediately, but soon. She is worried about Dad being so far away, especially after the heart attack. And since we're here, she thought it would be nice to be near family. Emily had glanced at him, surprised. But the wedding? They're still getting married, just keeping it simple. Courthouse ceremony when Dad feels better. But Trish is already looking at apartments in the area. She actually wants to meet you properly. She feels terrible that you couldn't make it to Arizona. Something about the situation felt rushed, but Emily pushed the feeling aside. Family was important. And if David's soon-to-be stepmother wanted to be closer, that was actually touching. Emily had always wanted a larger family. Her own parents had passed away in a car accident when she was 23, and she had no siblings. The idea of having a mother figure, even through marriage, held a certain appeal. 2 weeks later, Emily met Patricia Morrison for the first time. They had arranged to have dinner at Emily and David's house. Emily had spent the entire day preparing, wanting to make a good impression. She had made lasagna, garlic bread, and a Caesar salad, followed by homemade tiramisu. The house was spotless. She had even bought fresh flowers for the dining table. When the doorbell rang at 6:30, Emily smoothed her dress and opened the door with a welcoming smile. Patricia Morrison was striking. She was 48 according to David, but could have passed for 40. Her hair was a rich chestnut brown with subtle highlights that styled in soft waves that framed her face. She wore a cream-colored blouse and tailored gray pants that suggested both elegance and understated wealth. Her makeup was perfect, but not overdone. Her smile was warm and reached her eyes, which were an unusual shade of amber. "Emily!" Patricia had exclaimed, pulling her into a hug before Emily could offer a handshake. The hug lasted just a moment too long, but Emily attributed it to enthusiasm. Patricia smelled of expensive perfume, something floral and sophisticated. David appeared behind Emily, and Patricia released her to embrace him. "David, darling, look at this beautiful home you've made." They had moved into the living room, and Emily poured wine while Patricia admired the decor. She complimented everything, the choice of paint colors, the furniture arrangement, even the small potted succulent on the bookcase. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, and Emily found herself relaxing. Over dinner, Patricia proved to be an excellent conversationalist. She asked Emily about her work at the hotel, seeming genuinely interested in the stories of difficult guests and memorable interactions. She shared stories about David's father, painting a picture of a man who was kind, thoughtful, and occasionally stubborn in endearing ways.
"He's so much like David," Patricia had said at one point, reaching across the table to pat David's hand. "Strong, reliable, protective of the people he loves." The gesture had been motherly, appropriate, but something about the way her hand lingered for just a second made Emily's smile falter. She had dismissed it immediately. She was being ridiculous, looking for problems where none existed. As the evening progressed, Patricia mentioned she had found an apartment just 10 minutes away. She would be moving in within the month. "I hope I'm not imposing," she had said, looking at Emily with an expression of genuine concern. "I just felt drawn to this area. And honestly, I'm excited to get to know you better. David's father talks about you so lovingly, and I feel like we could be great friends." Emily had assured her it was wonderful, that they would love having her nearby. And she had meant it. Patricia seemed warm, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in being part of their lives. But that night, after Patricia left and Emily was washing dishes, She had noticed something odd. One of her earrings was missing. She had been wearing them during dinner, small diamond studs that David had given her for their anniversary. She checked the bathroom, the bedroom, retraced her steps. Nothing. "Did you see my earring?" she had asked David. He had looked up from his phone. "Which one?" "The diamond studs. I was wearing them at dinner, and now one's missing." David had helped her look for a few minutes before shrugging. "Maybe it fell off somewhere. It'll turn up." Emily had felt unsettled, but tried to shake it off. Things got lost sometimes. It didn't mean anything. Patricia's presence became a constant in their lives over the following weeks. She called frequently, sometimes asking for David's advice on her apartment setup, other times just chatting with Emily about nothing in particular. She brought gifts, a scented candle for the house, a silk scarf for Emily that she claimed reminded her of Emily's eyes, a bottle of expensive scotch for David. She integrated herself into their routine with remarkable speed. Sunday dinners became a regular occurrence. Patricia would often drop by unexpectedly, always with the convenient excuse. She was in the neighborhood. She had extra cookies from baking and thought they might want some. She wanted David's opinion on a repair issue in her apartment. Emily tried to embrace it. This was family after all. This was what having a mother figure felt like. But there were small moments that gave her pause, like the way Patricia knew where things were in their house without being told. Emily had once mentioned needing aspirin, and Patricia had walked straight to the bathroom cabinet and retrieved the bottle without asking where it was kept. When Emily had commented on it, Patricia had laughed and said, "Oh, I must have seen it last time I was here. I have a good memory for spatial things." Or the way she sometimes touched David. Nothing inappropriate, exactly, but there was a familiarity that seemed to exceed what Emily understood of stepmother-stepson relationships. A hand on his shoulder that lingered, standing close enough that their arms touched. Inside jokes that Emily wasn't part of. David seemed oblivious. He was clearly happy to have family nearby, and he treated Patricia with warmth and respect. When Emily had gently mentioned that Patricia seemed very present in their lives, David had looked at her with confusion. "She is just trying to build a relationship with us. She's going to be my stepmother officially once Dad's health is better and they can actually get married. I think it's nice that she's making an effort. Your parents are gone and mine are divorced. Isn't it good to have family around?" Emily had felt immediately guilty for questioning it. He was right. She was being ungrateful, looking for problems in a situation that was actually a blessing. She resolved to be more welcoming, more open. But then strange things started happening. Small things at first. Emily would come home from work and find items moved. A picture frame turned slightly. A chair pulled out from the dining table when she knew she had pushed them all in that morning. Books on the shelf rearranged. When she mentioned it to David, he suggested she was misremembering. "You were probably distracted this morning. We've both been busy." Then bigger things. Emily's work schedule, which she kept posted on the refrigerator, went missing. She found it 3 days later in the drawer where they kept takeout menus, which made no sense because she never would have put it there. A necklace disappeared from her jewelry box and reappeared a week later in the bathroom behind the toilet paper. "I think I'm losing my mind," Emily had joked to Marcus at work, but the humor felt forced. The situation at the Grandview Hotel was changing too. Emily had always received excellent performance reviews, but her supervisor had recently pulled her aside to mention that several guests had complained about her service. Allegedly, she had been rude during check-ins, had made errors in reservations, and even given the wrong room key to a guest, leading to an embarrassing situation. Emily had been stunned. She had no memory of any of these incidents. She prided herself on her professionalism. When she asked for specifics, her supervisor had seemed uncomfortable, showing her written complaints that Emily insisted she couldn't have been responsible for because she hadn't been working on those days. But when they checked the schedule, it showed she had been working. Her time card confirmed it. Emily had felt reality tilt slightly. She knew she hadn't been there on those days. She specifically remembered having those days off. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Maybe you're stressed than you realize, her supervisor had said gently. Is everything okay at home? Emily had assured him everything was fine, but doubt had begun to creep in. Was something wrong with her? Was she forgetting things, having memory lapses? David had been supportive but concerned when she told him. Maybe you should see a doctor, he suggested. You've been working a lot, and with everything going on, stress can do weird things to your mind. Patricia had been even more sympathetic. She had come over for dinner the night after Emily's work incident and had listened with such understanding as Emily explained her confusion. Oh, sweetheart, Patricia had said, reaching across the table to hold Emily's hand. This must be so frightening for you. You know, my own mother went through something similar when she was about your age. It turned out to be anxiety manifesting as memory issues. Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist might help. The suggestion had been made with such kindness that Emily felt tears prick her eyes. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was struggling with something she hadn't recognized. The stress of work, of trying to be a good wife, of integrating Patricia into their lives. Maybe it was all too much, and her mind was simply breaking down. But then Emily found the photographs. She had been looking for an old thumb drive in David's home office, searching through the desk drawers with his permission because she needed files from their taxes 2 years ago. In the bottom drawer, pushed toward the back, she found a folder. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. They showed David and Patricia together, but not in the formal, familial way of recent months. These were intimate photos. David's arm around Patricia's waist at what looked like a restaurant. Patricia kissing David's cheek at some kind of resort. The two of them in business casual attire standing in front of a hotel, not the Grandview, but Emily recognized it as a boutique hotel downtown. Her hands had trembled as she looked through the photographs. The photos were dated. She could see the timestamps. They went back 5 years. 5 years. That was a year before Emily had even met David.
But that couldn't be right. David hadn't known Patricia 5 years ago. Patricia was his father's new fiancée. They had only met when his father started dating her, which was... Emily tried to remember. David had said his father had been dating Patricia for about a year before deciding to get married. So they would have met roughly 18 months ago? Maximum 2 years if they'd been dating longer than David had let on before telling the family. These photos were from 5 years ago, and 3 years ago, and 2 years ago. There were even some from 8 months ago, around the time David had told Emily his father was getting remarried. Emily felt the room spin. She sat down hard in David's office chair, the folder falling from her hands, photographs scattering across the desk. There was only one explanation, and it was impossible. Except it wasn't impossible. It was staring her in the face in glossy 4x6 prints. Patricia wasn't David's stepmother. She was his mistress. Emily sat frozen in David's office chair, staring at the scattered photographs as her mind raced through implications and memories, reassembling everything she thought she knew into a different, darker picture. Her first instinct was denial. There had to be another explanation. Maybe Patricia had known David before his father met her. Maybe they had worked together or been friends, and the photos were innocent, and she was misinterpreting the body language and the intimate settings and the way Patricia's hand rested on David's chest in one particularly damning image. But even as Emily constructed these alternative narratives, she knew they were lies she was telling herself. The photos told a clear story. The timestamps spanned years. The locations varied. Restaurants, hotels, what looked like someone's apartment, a beach somewhere tropical. In several photos, they wore matching outfits, the kind of coordinated clothing that couples chose deliberately for pictures. In others, they were caught in candid moments that spoke of comfort and familiarity that went far beyond friendship or professional acquaintance. Emily picked up a photo dated from 3 years ago. In it, David and Patricia sat at an outdoor cafe, their heads close together, Patricia's hand covering David's on the table. Emily recognized David's watch. She had given it to him for his birthday that same year, which meant that this photo had been taken while he was married to Emily. The nausea hit her suddenly. Emily barely made it to the bathroom before she vomited, her body rejecting the reality she was being forced to accept. She knelt on the cold tile, shaking, trying to breathe through the panic.
When the sickness passed, Emily washed her face and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked pale, her eyes too wide, her hands still trembling. She forced herself to think clearly. David would be home in 3 hours. She needed to decide what to do. She could confront him immediately, demand explanations, let her anger and hurt explode across their home like a grenade. But something stopped her. A survival instinct she didn't know she possessed whispered that confronting him without more information would be a mistake. If David and Patricia had been conducting an affair for years, if they had been bold enough to fabricate an entire backstory about Patricia being his stepmother, then they were calculating. They had planned this, and Emily had fallen for it completely. The thought made her feel stupid and naive, but she pushed past the shame. She needed to be smart now. She needed proof, and she needed to understand the full scope of what they had done to her. Emily returned to the office and carefully photographed every picture with her phone, making sure to capture the timestamps. She checked her photo gallery to confirm they had saved properly, then put the physical photos back in the folder exactly as she had found them, arranging them in the same order. She placed the folder back in the drawer, positioning it in the same spot, pushed toward the back. Her hands were steadier now. Anger was replacing shock, and anger made her focused. Emily went through the rest of David's office methodically. She checked other drawers, looked through files, examined his computer, though it was password protected. She found bank statements that showed regular cash withdrawals, always the same amount, $300 every 2 weeks. She found receipts tucked in an envelope, charges from restaurants and hotels that Emily had never been to. She found a prepaid cell phone and a laptop bag, the kind you could buy at any drugstore without a contract. Every piece of evidence she found, she documented with her phone. By the time she finished, Emily had built a timeline in her mind. David and Patricia had been together for at least 5 years, possibly longer. The affair had been ongoing throughout Emily's entire relationship with David, including their marriage. At some point, Emily couldn't determine exactly when, they had concocted the stepmother story. It was ingenious in its audacity. By claiming Patricia was marrying David's father, they gave themselves a legitimate reason to be in each other's lives constantly. Patricia could insert herself into David and Emily's home, their routine, their marriage, and no one would question it because she was family. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? If David wanted to be with Patricia, why not just divorce Emily? Why the deception, the gaslighting, the systematic dismantling of Emily's credibility? The answer came to Emily as she stood in the office looking at the evidence she had gathered. The house. David's name was on the mortgage, but Emily had contributed her savings as a down payment. In a divorce, Emily would be entitled to her share. There was also David's growing retirement account, his investments, the life insurance policy that named Emily as the beneficiary. They weren't just having an affair, they were trying to make Emily look unstable, unreliable, possibly even mentally ill. If they could establish a pattern of Emily being irrational, forgetful, paranoid, then David would have grounds for a divorce that favored him. Emily's credibility would be destroyed. She would look like the problem. And if they had been the ones moving items in the house, altering her schedule, creating complaints at the hotel, Emily felt cold, understanding settle over her. They had been manufacturing her breakdown. Patricia's sudden presence in their lives, the missing items, the schedule changes, the work complaints that Emily couldn't explain, it was all designed to make Emily doubt herself, to make her appear unstable to others. She heard David's car in the driveway. Emily quickly pocketed her phone and left the office, her heart pounding. She had maybe 30 seconds before he came through the door. She went to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients for dinner, forcing her hands to stay steady, her breathing to remain calm. The front door opened. "Am I home?" David's voice sounded exactly as it always did, warm, casual, the voice of a husband returning from work to his wife. Emily wanted to scream. "In the kitchen," she called back, amazed at how normal her own voice sounded. David appeared a moment later, loosening his tie. He kissed her cheek, and Emily had to fight every instinct not to flinch away. "How was your day?" "Fine," Emily said, chopping vegetables with focused intensity. "Quiet day at the hotel. How about you?" They fell into their normal evening routine. David talked about a project at work while Emily finished preparing dinner. They ate at the dining table, discussing mundane topics, whether they needed to call a plumber for the leaky faucet, what they should watch on Netflix that evening, whether they should finally try that new restaurant downtown. Emily played her part perfectly. She laughed at David's jokes. She asked follow-up questions about his day. She was the wife she had always been, and David suspected nothing. After dinner, as David settled onto the couch with his laptop, Emily excused herself to take a shower. In the bathroom, she finally let herself feel the full weight of what she had discovered. She sat on the shower floor, hot water streaming over her, and cried silently, her hand pressed against her mouth to muffle any sound. When she emerged 20 minutes later, composed and dry-eyed, she found David on the phone. He was speaking quietly, his back to the bedroom door. Emily stood in the hallway, listening. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. I told you it's working perfectly." A pause. "Tomorrow? Yeah, she has the evening shift, so she'll be at work. Come over around 7. Another pause, then a low laugh. "I know. Not much longer now. Once we have enough documented instances of her being unstable, I can file. My lawyer says with the work complaints and the paranoia, we shouldn't have any problem getting a favorable settlement." Emily's stomach twisted. She silently backed away from the door and went to the guest bathroom, flushing the toilet and running water so David would hear her moving around the house. When she returned to the bedroom, David was off the phone, his expression pleasant and mild. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just tired," said Emily. "Long week." She climbed into bed beside her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, the man she had built a life with, and she felt nothing but cold determination. They thought they were so clever. They thought they had broken her down, made her doubt herself, positioned everything so perfectly that she would emerge from this destroyed. They were wrong. Over the next week, Emily became someone she didn't recognize. She maintained her normal routine flawlessly. She went to work, came home, smiled at David, remained friendly when Patricia called or visited. But beneath the surface, she was gathering information with methodical precision. She checked the work schedule at the Grandview and discovered that someone had been altering it in the computer system. It took some careful investigation, but Emily found that changes had been made from a device with Patricia's IP address, something she verified by comparing timestamps with Patricia's visits to the hotel. Patricia had come to the Grandview several times in recent weeks, always claiming she was in the area and wanted to visit Emily, always staying just long enough for coffee in the lobby. But she must have been accessing the reception computer when Emily stepped away, making changes that would create confusion and complaints. Emily documented everything. She took photos of the computer logs, screenshots of the altered schedules, copies of the guest complaints that had been filed against her. She noticed that several complaints came from guests who had checked in on days Emily actually hadn't been working, despite what the altered schedule showed. She pulled up security footage, the Grandview kept digital recordings for 90 days, and confirmed that she hadn't been at the desk when the incident supposedly occurred. At home, Emily set up her phone to record video whenever she left the house. She positioned it on a bookshelf with a view of the living room and kitchen, disguised among other items. She told David she was doing a time-lapse art project in case he noticed, but he never asked. The recordings showed Patricia entering the house using a key and Emily never gave her, and moving items, going through drawers, even deleting messages from the answering machine. Emily's anger grew with each piece of evidence, but she kept it controlled, channeled into productive action. She opened a separate bank account that David didn't know about and started transferring money in small amounts. She made copies of important documents, the house deed, their marriage certificate, David's financial records that she could access. She stored everything in a secure cloud account that only she could access. She also started paying attention to Patricia and David's interactions with fresh eyes. On a Sunday dinner at their house, Emily excused herself to use the bathroom, but instead stood in the hallway, observing. When they thought she was out of earshot, their body language changed completely. Patricia sat closer to David. Their conversation dropped into the intimate shorthand of long-term couples. At one point, Patricia's hand slid to David's thigh under the table, and he covered it with his own. Emily had returned to the dining room, and they had smoothly shifted back into their roles. Patricia asking Emily about a recipe, David checking his phone with casual disinterest. The gaslighting intensified. More items went missing. Emily received a call from her supervisor about another guest complaint, this one claiming Emily had been verbally abusive during check-in. Emily had security footage proving she hadn't been working that day. But before she could present it, the footage mysteriously became corrupted. David suggested more frequently that Emily seemed stressed, forgetful, not quite herself. He proposed she take medical leave from work, see a doctor, maybe get some tests done. Patricia echoed the concerns with her perfect mask of worry, suggesting specialists, offering to help Emily find a good therapist. They were closing in, tightening the net. Emily could feel it. They thought they almost had her where they wanted her, discredited, doubting herself, on the verge of a breakdown that they had engineered. But Emily had advantages they didn't know about. She had evidence, she had clarity, and she had been underestimated her entire life. By her parents, who had never believed she could amount to much. By teachers who thought she was merely average. By David, who had chosen her precisely because he thought she'd be easy to manipulate. Emily was done being underestimated. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. Emily was working the late shift at the Grandview when she received a call from her bank. There had been suspicious activity on her account, large transfers to an account she didn't recognize. Emily's blood ran cold. She checked her banking app and saw that someone had attempted to transfer $15,000, nearly everything in their joint savings. The transfer had been blocked because it exceeded the daily limit and required some additional verification, but the attempt was there in black and white. Emily checked the details. The transfer had been initiated from David's laptop. They weren't just trying to discredit her, they were trying to rob her too. Emily left work early, claiming a family emergency. She drove home with her mind racing. This was escalating faster than she had anticipated. If they were bold enough to try stealing her money, what else might they do? How far were they willing to go? She arrived home to find David and Patricia in the living room, their body language intimate, their conversation stopping abruptly when Emily walked in. Patricia shouldn't have been there. It was past 9 on a weeknight, and she hadn't called or texted to say she was coming over. "Sweetheart, that's exactly what I mean," David said, standing and approaching her. "You seem confused. You knew Patricia was coming over tonight. We talked about it this morning. Don't you remember?" Emily knew they hadn't discussed it. She was certain. But David sounded so sure, and Patricia was nodding sympathetically. And for just a moment, one terrible, disorienting moment, Emily wondered if she was wrong, if maybe she was losing her mind after all. Then she saw it, the smallest slip. Patricia's hand rested on the back of the couch, and her fingers tapped twice in a deliberate pattern. David's eyes flicked to the gesture, and his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. It was a signal. They were coordinating their story right in front of her.
The moment of doubt evaporated. Emily smiled, and it felt like putting on armor. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry. I completely forgot. I should probably get some rest." She excused herself and went upstairs, leaving them in the living room. She heard their voices continue in low murmurs. Emily locked the bedroom door and sat on the bed, her phone in her hands. She had enough evidence now, more than enough. But she needed one more thing. She needed David's father. She needed to confirm that he had never been with Patricia, that the entire story was fabricated. Emily pulled up her contacts and found David's father's number. She had only called him a handful of times, usually to wish him happy birthday or happy holidays. Her finger hovered over the call button. It was late, nearly 10 o'clock, but this couldn't wait.
She pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. Hello? Mr. Carter, it's Emily. I'm so sorry to call so late. Emily? He sounded confused, but not upset. Is everything all right? Is David okay? David's fine. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. It's important. There was a pause. Of course. What's going on? Emily took a deep breath. Are you engaged to a woman named Patricia Morrison? Or Trish? Silence. Then, what? No, I'm not engaged to anyone. Emily, what is this about? Emily closed her eyes, relief and fury warring inside her. Have you ever dated anyone named Patricia Morrison or Trish? No, I don't know anyone by that name. Emily, you're scaring me. What's going on? Why would you think I was engaged? How's your heart? Are you okay? My heart? I'm fine. Why would you... Wait, did David tell you something happened to me? He said you had a heart attack in September, that you were in the hospital. I haven't been in any hospital. Emily, I'm perfectly healthy. I had my physical last month and everything was fine. What the hell is going on? Why would David tell you I had a heart attack? Emily felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. David had lied about his father's health to explain why the supposed wedding was postponed. There had never been a wedding planned because there was no engagement. Patricia Morrison wasn't becoming David's stepmother because Patricia Morrison had never even met David's father. Mr. Carter, Emily said quietly, I need you to listen very carefully. Something very wrong is happening, and I need your help. Downstairs, she could still hear voices. David and Patricia plotting her destruction, believing they had everything under control. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Emily spoke with David's father for nearly an hour, explaining everything she had discovered. To his credit, Mr. Carter listened without interrupting, though she could hear his shock and anger building as she described the elaborate deception his son had constructed. When Emily finished, there was a long silence on the line. I can't believe, his voice broke. I raised him better than this. How could he do this to you? And to use me as part of the lie? I need you to trust me and not contact David yet, Emily said urgently. If he knows that I've spoken to you, if he realizes I know the truth, I don't know what he might do. They're already trying to make me look unstable. If they feel cornered... What do you need from me? Mr. Carter asked, his voice hardening with resolve. I need you to be willing to confirm everything when the time comes. I need you to be ready to tell the truth about never being engaged, never having a heart attack, never meeting Patricia Morrison. Can you do that? Absolutely. Emily, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I wish I could come there right now and confront him myself. Not yet, Emily cautioned. I have a plan, but I need everything to be documented properly. A few more days, that's all. After hanging up, Emily sat on the bed and finalized her strategy. She had all the pieces now: photographic evidence of the affair, documentation of the gaslighting, security footage from the hotel, financial records showing David's attempted theft, and most crucially, testimony from David's father that would demolish the entire stepmother fabrication. But Emily needed to be careful about how she deployed this information. If she confronted them directly, they could destroy evidence, coordinate their stories, or potentially do something more drastic. Emily needed them to expose themselves completely, on record, in a way that left no room for denial. She unlocked the bedroom door and went downstairs. Patricia had left. Her car was no longer in the driveway, and David was in the kitchen making tea. He looked up when Emily entered, his expression shifting to one of gentle concern. Are feeling better? He asked. You seemed really out of it earlier. Emily poured herself a glass of water, buying time to ensure her voice would remain steady. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "maybe you're right. Maybe I should see someone, a doctor or a therapist. I don't feel like myself lately." She watched David's face as she spoke. For just a fraction of a second, she saw satisfaction flicker across his features before the concerned husband mask slid back into place. "I think that's a really good idea," David said, moving closer to put his arm around her shoulders. Emily forced herself not to stiffen at his touch. "I'll help you find someone. Patricia actually mentioned a colleague of hers who specializes in anxiety and memory issues. I could get you his number." Of course, Patricia had a convenient recommendation. Of course, they already had the next step planned. "That would be great," Emily said, leaning into David's embrace, playing the role of the grateful, confused wife who was finally accepting that something was wrong with her. "Thank you for being so patient with me." "That's what marriage is about," David said, kissing the top of her head. The words should have been sweet. Instead, they made Emily's skin crawl. But she smiled and nodded and let him lead her to the couch where they sat together watching television until bedtime, David occasionally squeezing her hand in what was meant to be reassurance. That night, Emily lay awake beside her sleeping husband, listening to his steady breathing, and refined her plan. She would need help to execute it properly. She couldn't do this alone. David and Patricia had resources, connections, and a head start on their deception. Emily needed an ally, someone who could be trusted completely. The next morning, Emily called in sick for work. She told her supervisor she needed to take a few personal days to deal with some health issues. Then she drove to a law office downtown, one she had researched carefully to ensure it had no connections to David's firm or social circles. The attorney she met with was a woman named Caroline Chen, a sharp-eyed specialist in family law with a reputation for handling complex divorce cases. Emily laid out everything: the photographs, the documentation, the security footage, the phone conversation with David's father, the financial records showing David's attempted theft, and most crucially, testimony from David's father that would demolish the entire stepmother fabrication. But Emily needed to be careful about how she deployed this information. If she confronted them directly, they could destroy evidence, coordinate their stories, or potentially do something more drastic. Emily needed them to expose themselves completely, on record, in a way that left no room for denial. She unlocked the bedroom door and went downstairs. Patricia had left. Her car was no longer in the driveway, and David was in the kitchen making tea. He looked up when Emily entered, his expression shifting to one of gentle concern. "Are feeling better? You seemed really out of it earlier." "I've poured myself a glass of water," buying time to ensure her voice would remain steady. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "maybe you're right. Maybe I should see someone, a doctor or a therapist. I don't feel like myself lately." She watched David's face as she spoke. For just a fraction of a second, she saw satisfaction flicker across his features before the concerned husband mask slid back into place. "I think that's a really good idea," David said, moving closer to put his arm around her shoulders. Emily forced herself not to stiffen at his touch. "I'll help you find someone. Patricia actually mentioned a colleague of hers who specializes in anxiety and memory issues. I could get you his number." Of course, Patricia had a convenient recommendation. Of course, they already had the next step planned. "That would be great," Emily said, leaning into David's embrace, playing the role of the grateful, confused wife who was finally accepting that something was wrong with her. "Thank you for being so patient with me." "That's what marriage is about," David said, kissing the top of her head. The words should have been sweet. Instead, they made Emily's skin crawl. But she smiled and nodded and let him lead her to the couch where they sat together watching television until bedtime, David occasionally squeezing her hand in what was meant to be reassurance. That night, Emily lay awake beside her sleeping husband, listening to his steady breathing, and refined her plan. She would need help to execute it properly. She couldn't do this alone. David and Patricia had resources, connections, and a head start on their deception. Emily needed an ally, someone who could be trusted completely. The next morning, Emily called in sick for work. She told her supervisor she needed to take a few personal days to deal with some health issues. Then she drove to a law office downtown, one she had researched carefully to ensure it had no connections to David's firm or social circles. The attorney she met with was a woman named Caroline Chen, a sharp-eyed specialist in family law with a reputation for handling complex divorce cases. Emily laid out everything: the photographs, the documentation, the security footage, the phone conversation with David's father, the financial records showing David's attempted theft, and most crucially, testimony from David's father that would demolish the entire stepmother fabrication. But Emily needed to be careful about how she deployed this information. If she confronted them directly, they could destroy evidence, coordinate their stories, or potentially do something more drastic. Emily needed them to expose themselves completely, on record, in a way that left no room for denial. She unlocked the bedroom door and went downstairs. Patricia had left. Her car was no longer in the driveway, and David was in the kitchen making tea. He looked up when Emily entered, his expression shifting to one of gentle concern. "Are feeling better? You seemed really out of it earlier." "I've been thinking, maybe you're right. Maybe I should see someone. A doctor or a therapist. I don't feel like myself lately." She watched David's face as she spoke. For just a fraction of a second, she saw satisfaction flicker across his features before the concerned husband mask slid back into place. "I think that's a really good idea. I'll help you find someone." Patricia actually mentioned a colleague of hers who specializes in anxiety and memory issues. "I could get you his number." Of course, Patricia had a convenient recommendation. Of course, they already had the next step planned. "That would be great," Emily said, leaning into David's embrace, playing the role of the grateful, confused wife who was finally accepting that something was wrong with her. "Thank you for being so patient with me." "That's what marriage is about," David said, kissing the top of her head. The words should have been sweet. Instead, they made Emily's skin crawl. But she smiled and nodded, and let him lead her to the couch where they sat together watching television until bedtime, David occasionally squeezing her hand in what was meant to be reassurance. That night, Emily lay awake beside her sleeping husband, listening to his steady breathing, and refined her plan. She would need help to execute it properly. She couldn't do this alone. David and Patricia had resources, connections, and a head start on their deception. Emily needed an ally, someone who could be trusted completely. The next morning, Emily called in sick for work. She told her supervisor she needed to take a few personal days to deal with some health issues. Then she drove to a law office downtown, one she had researched carefully to ensure it had no connections to David's firm or social circles. The attorney she met with was a woman named Caroline Chen, a sharp-eyed specialist in family law with a reputation for handling complex divorce cases. Emily laid out everything: the photographs, the documentation, the security footage, the phone conversation with David's father, the financial records showing David's attempted theft, and most.
The attorney she met with was a woman named Caroline Chen, a sharp-eyed specialist in family law with a reputation for handling complex divorce cases. Emily laid out everything: the photographs, the documentation, the security footage, the phone conversation with David's father, the financial records showing attempted theft. She held nothing back. Caroline listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Emily finished, the attorney sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "This is one of the most calculated cases of gaslighting and financial manipulation I've seen in 20 years of practice," Caroline said. "They've been building a paper trail to destroy your credibility while positioning themselves to take your assets. If you hadn't discovered those photos when you did," she shook her head, "you're lucky and smart for documenting everything." "Can we use this?" Emily asked. "Is it enough?" "It's more than enough," Caroline assured her, "but we need to be strategic about how we proceed. They're clearly sophisticated in their deception, which means they'll have contingency plans. We need to make sure they can't wiggle out of this or retaliate in ways that could harm you further." They spent the next 3 hours developing a comprehensive strategy. Caroline would file for divorce on Emily's behalf, but only after they had taken several preparatory steps. First, they would secure Emily's finances by freezing the joint accounts and establishing her sole ownership of the assets she had contributed. Second, they would compile all the evidence into a legal brief that could be submitted to the court. Third, they would arrange for depositions from key witnesses, including David's father, to be recorded. But Caroline had one more suggestion that made Emily's pulse quicken. They think you're on the verge of a breakdown. They think they've won. What if we use that? What if we let them believe they've succeeded right up until the moment we pull the rug out from under them? Emily understood immediately. You want me to stage a confrontation, make them think I'm falling apart. Exactly, but we'll be recording everything. We'll have witnesses, we'll document their admission of the affair and the gaslighting in their own words. It's risky, you'll have to be convincing, but it would give us ironclad evidence that would hold up in any court. Emily thought about it. The idea of confronting David and Patricia while pretending to be the unstable wife they thought they had created was both terrifying and deeply appealing. She would be turning their own weapon against them. I'll do it, Emily said. Tell me what I need to do. Over the weekend, Emily prepared. Caroline had hired a private investigator to install hidden cameras in Emily's home, small devices, concealed in everyday objects that would record audio and video without detection. Emily felt uncomfortable about the invasion of her own privacy, but Caroline assured her it was legal since it was Emily's home and she was one of the residents. The devices were installed on Friday afternoon while David was at work and would capture everything that happened in the main living areas. Emily also met with David's father via video call, Caroline present, to document his testimony. Mr. Carter was visibly angry as he confirmed on record that he had never been engaged to Patricia Morrison, had never dated anyone by that name, and had never had a heart attack or any serious health issues in the past year. He stated clearly that he had no idea why his son would fabricate such an elaborate lie. I want to help however I can, Mr. Carter said, his jaw set. David needs to face consequences for this, and Patricia Morrison, whoever she is, needs to be held accountable too. By Sunday evening, everything was in place. The cameras were recording, the divorce papers were prepared and ready to file, Emily's finances were protected. Caroline had even arranged for a police officer to be on standby nearby in case the confrontation turned dangerous, something Emily hadn't considered but was grateful for. Now came the hardest part, convincing David and Patricia that their plan had worked. On Monday morning, Emily called David at work. She made her voice shaky, on the edge of tears. "Can you come home? I need you. Something's wrong." David's concern sounded genuine, though Emily now recognized it as performance. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I can't explain it. Please, I need you here." "I'm leaving now, okay? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Emily hung up and immediately called Patricia. "It's Emily. Can you come over? David is on his way home, but I need someone to talk to. A woman, please." Patricia agreed immediately, her voice dripping with sympathetic concern. "Of course, sweetie. I'll be right there. Are you at home?" "Yes. Hurry." Emily hung up and looked around the living room. The cameras were recording. Caroline was on standby, monitoring via the video feed from her office. The police officer was parked 2 blocks away. Everything was ready. Emily sat on the couch and waited. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, trusting, content, believing in the goodness of her marriage and the authenticity of family bonds. That woman was gone, destroyed by the people who were supposed to love her. But from those ashes, someone stronger had emerged. Patricia arrived first, letting herself in with her key. She found Emily on the couch, and Emily made sure to look appropriately distressed, hands shaking slightly, eyes red-rimmed, breathing uneven. "Emily, what's happening?" Patricia sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "I think I'm losing my mind," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Things keep happening and I don't remember them. People at work say I did things I know I didn't do. Items in the house move and I don't know how.
I can't trust my own memory anymore. Oh, sweetheart, it's okay. You're going to be okay. We're going to get you help. David burst through the door moments later. Em? He saw her on the couch with Patricia and rushed over. What's going on? Emily looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. I found something in your office, photos of you and Patricia together. But that doesn't make sense because Patricia is your stepmother. Except the photos are from before you knew her, from before your dad knew her, and I don't understand what's happening. She watched them exchange a glance. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but she saw David's eyes flick to Patricia and Patricia give a small nod. They were deciding how to handle this. Emily, David said slowly, sitting on her other side so she was between them. You're confused again. Those photos, Patricia and I knew each other before Dad met her. We worked together briefly years ago. That's actually how Dad met her. I introduced them. It was a good lie, delivered smoothly. If Emily hadn't known better, she might have believed it. But you never mentioned that. You told me you only met her when your dad started dating her. I did tell you, don't you remember? We talked about it. You're forgetting things, Em. Important things. That's why we're worried about you. Patricia nodded, her expression grave. We should get you to a doctor right away. Today. This kind of memory loss and confusion is not normal. Emily let tears spill down her cheeks. I'm scared. I feel like I'm going crazy. You're not crazy, David said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he believed the opposite. You're just sick. We're going to take care of you. Emily took a shuddering breath and then looked directly at David. Is there anything else you need to tell me about you and Patricia? Another glance between them. David's hand found Patricia's behind Emily's back. She could feel the movement.
Like what? David asked carefully. I don't know, Emily said. I just feel like something's wrong, like I'm missing something. Are you two closer than you've told me? Emily, that's the paranoia talking, Patricia said gently. This is exactly what we've been worried about. You're creating problems that don't exist, seeing conspiracies where there are none. It's a symptom of what you're going through. Maybe, Emily whispered. She wiped her eyes and looked between them. Or maybe I'm the only one seeing clearly for the first time. The atmosphere in the room shifted. David's expression hardened slightly. What are you saying? Emily stood up, putting distance between herself and them. I'm saying I know. About everything. The affair, the fake stepmother story, your father who was never sick, who never got engaged, who doesn't even know Patricia exists, the gaslighting, moving things in my house, tampering with my work schedule, trying to steal my money. I know all of it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Patricia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. See, David, I told you she was getting worse. Now she's creating elaborate fantasies. But David was staring at Emily with new intensity, calculating. How long have you known? Does it matter? Emily asked. You've been playing us, David said slowly, standing. All that confused act earlier, that was performance. You knew. Patricia stood too, her expression shifting from fake concern to something colder. What do you think you're going to do with this supposed knowledge? Tell people? No one will believe you. You're the unstable one, remember? We've made sure of that. Have you? Emily asked. Or have you just been creating a paper trail that proves what you've been doing to me? She saw doubt flicker across Patricia's face, but David's expression remained hard. You don't have any proof, David said. Whatever you think you know. I have photos of you two together spanning 5 years, Emily interrupted. I have security footage from the hotel showing Patricia tampering with the computer system. I have bank records of your attempted theft. I have testimony from your father confirming he was never engaged to Patricia and never had a heart attack. I have recordings of Patricia entering this house with a key I never gave her and moving items. I have documentation of every lie, every manipulation, and every calculated move you've made to destroy my credibility. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily could see them processing, understanding that they had been outmaneuvered. And, Emily continued, her voice steady now,
I've been recording this entire conversation. Every word you've said, every admission, every moment of you pretending to be concerned while actually just trying to manage your exposed lie. The cameras are rolling right now. My attorney has access to the feed, and there's a police officer 2 blocks away if either of you decide to do something stupid. Patricia's face went pale. David's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally resignation. You bitch, Patricia hissed, all pretense of warmth gone. We had this planned perfectly. You were supposed to break down completely, become so discredited that David could leave me with reasonable cause and minimal financial loss, maybe even have me committed somewhere so I'd be completely out of the way. What was the end game? How far were you planning to take this? You don't understand, David said, but his voice lacked conviction now. Then explain it to me, Emily challenged. Explain how you could marry me while carrying on with your mistress. Explain how you could bring her into our home disguised as family. Explain how you could systematically work to destroy my mental health and steal my money. I'm listening. David and Patricia looked at each other, and in that moment, Emily saw them as they truly were. 2 people who had believed themselves clever enough to get away with something monstrous, now realizing they had been caught completely. The marriage was a mistake, David said finally. I was with Patricia first. We'd been together for years, but she was married, getting divorced. It was complicated. I met you, and you were easy, uncomplicated. You didn't ask for much. I thought I could have both, the stability of a wife and the passion with Patricia. Then Patricia's divorce finalized, and she wanted more from me. She wanted to be in my life openly. But I couldn't just divorce you without losing everything financially. So you decided to make me lose my mind instead. It wasn't supposed to hurt you this much, Patricia said, and she actually sounded like she believed that. We just needed you to seem unreliable, unstable enough that David could leave with a reasonable cause and minimal financial loss. You were supposed to just accept it eventually. I stared at them. These 2 people who had shared my home, shared meals at my table, looked me in the eye and lied without hesitation. You destroyed my sense of reality. You made me question my own memory, my own sanity. You almost succeeded in breaking me completely. And you think that wasn't meant to hurt me? We needed you out of the way, David said, and there was something chilling in how matter-of-fact he sounded. It was my life, Emily said quietly. My marriage, my home, my sanity. How was it not personal? Neither of them had an answer to that. Emily pulled out her phone and made a call. Caroline, they've admitted everything. It's all recorded. You can file the papers now. She paused, listening. Yes, I'm safe. They're not going to do anything. They know they're caught. She hung up and looked at David and Patricia one last time. Divorce papers will be served tomorrow. My attorney has all the evidence compiled, and she's filing for full restitution of my financial contributions, plus damages for emotional distress. You're both going to be exposed to your families, to your employers, to everyone who needs to know what you did. The police are investigating the identity theft and attempted financial fraud. And, David, your father wants to speak with you, though I imagine that's going to be an extremely unpleasant conversation. Emily, David started, and for the first time he sounded genuinely upset. It doesn't have to be this way. We can work something out. No, Emily said firmly. We really can't. I want both of you out of my house now. I've changed the locks. The keys you have won't work after you leave. If either of you come back or try to contact me outside of our attorneys, I'll file for a restraining order. Patricia grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with anger and panic. You think you've won? You think this is over? I think it's over for you, Emily replied. Leave. They left. Emily watched through the window as Patricia's car pulled away. David in the passenger seat. They had arrived separately, but were leaving together, their pretense finally abandoned. When their taillights disappeared around the corner, Emily's legs gave out. She sank on the couch, trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Her phone rang, Caroline checking in, but Emily couldn't answer yet. She sat in the house that was finally, truly her own alone, and let herself feel everything she had been holding back for weeks. The grief, the betrayal, the rage, the fear. but also the relief, the pride in herself for fighting back, the knowledge that she had survived something designed to destroy her. She had won, but the cost had been enormous, and the battle wasn't quite over yet.
The week following the confrontation felt surreal. Emily stayed home from work, using the time to process everything that had happened while also dealing with the practical aftermath of exposing David and Patricia's deception. Caroline had filed the divorce papers as promised, along with a detailed complaint outlining the fraud, emotional manipulation, and attempted theft. David had been served at his office, a small piece of public humiliation that Emily took no pleasure in but didn't regret either. The hidden cameras in the house had captured everything exactly as planned. The footage showed David and Patricia's initial attempt to maintain their lie, their growing alarm as they realized Emily knew the truth, and finally their cold admissions about the affair and their systematic campaign to make Emily appear mentally unstable. Caroline had assured Emily the recordings were legal and would be devastating evidence in court. But the legal proceedings were just beginning. The real unraveling happened in the days after, as the truth spread through their social circles like wildfire. David's father had flown in from Arizona immediately after learning what happened. He had called Emily first, apologizing profusely even though none of this was his fault, then had gone directly to confront David. Emily didn't know all the details of that conversation, but David's father had called her afterward, his voice heavy with disappointment and anger at his son. "I can't believe I raised someone capable of this," Mr. Carter had said. "I keep trying to understand how he became this person, and I have no answers. Emily, I'm so sorry for what he did to you, for how he used me as part of his lies. If there's anything I can do to help your case, anything at all, please tell me." Emily had thanked him and assured him his testimony would be crucial. They had talked for over an hour, and Emily realized she was losing not just her husband, but also the one member of David's family she had genuinely liked. Mr. Carter seemed to understand this too, and before hanging up, he had said something that stuck with her. "You're a strong woman, Emily, stronger than my son deserves. I hope when this is all over, you'll still be willing to stay in touch, not as family by law, but as friends. You deserve to have people in your corner." The conversation had made Emily cry, the first real tears she had allowed herself since the confrontation. Not tears of sadness exactly, but of recognition. She had spent so long feeling alone and gaslighted that having someone believe her completely, support her unconditionally, felt overwhelming. At work, Emily had to tell her supervisor the truth. She sat in his office and explained everything: the affair, the gaslighting, Patricia's manipulation of the hotel computer system, the fabricated complaints. She provided evidence for it all, including the security footage that showed Patricia accessing the reception computer during her visits. Her supervisor, Marcus, had listened with growing shock and anger. "Emily, I am so sorry. We should have investigated more thoroughly when those complaints came in. We should have trusted your track record instead of—" "You had no reason to doubt the evidence. That was the point. They made it look legitimate. You didn't do anything wrong." But the hotel took the matter seriously. Patricia was banned from the property, and they launched an internal review of their security protocols to prevent future unauthorized access to their systems. They also offered Emily paid leave to deal with the legal proceedings and counseling services if she needed them. Most significantly, Marcus had pulled her aside before she left. "Your job is secure, more than secure. When you're ready to come back, I'd like to discuss a promotion. What you did, documenting everything, staying composed under that kind of pressure, protecting yourself while gathering evidence, that shows management potential. We could use someone with your skills in a higher position." The offer had been unexpected and touching. Emily wasn't sure if she wanted to stay at the Grandview long term, but knowing she had options, that her career hadn't been destroyed by David and Patricia's schemes, meant everything. The social fallout was the most complex part. Emily and David had shared friends, couples that they had dinner with, people from David's work and Emily's social circles. In the days after the confrontation, Emily had to decide how much to tell and who to tell it to. Caroline had advised being strategic.
Don't blast it on social media or send mass emails. That can look vindictive and could potentially hurt your case, but you have every right to tell people the truth if they ask. Just stick to facts, don't embellish, and let the evidence speak for itself. Emily had followed that advice. When friends reached out, confused by rumors or concerned about her sudden absence from their lives, Emily explained calmly what had happened. Some believed her immediately. Others were skeptical, at least until Emily offered to share evidence. A few remained loyal to David, particularly his work friends who had known him longer, but Emily found she didn't care. Those relationships had always been more his than hers anyway. One conversation stood out. Emily's friend Jessica, someone she had been close to since college, had called her crying after hearing what happened. "I feel like I failed you," Jessica said. "I saw you guys at dinner just last month and everything seemed fine. How did I not notice something was wrong?" Because I didn't know something was wrong. And even when things started happening, the missing items, the confusion, they had me convinced I was the problem. If trained professionals didn't catch what they were doing, how could you have been expected to? What kind of person does something like this to someone they're supposed to love? Emily had thought about that question a lot over the past week. I don't think David ever loved me. Not really. I was convenient, a placeholder while he figured out his real relationship. And Patricia, I don't think she's capable of seeing other people as real. We're all just obstacles or tools to her. What they did to you, trying to make you think you were crazy, Emily, that's abuse. You know that, right? This was serious psychological abuse. Hearing someone else name it had been validating in a way Emily hadn't expected. I know. I'm going to start seeing a therapist. I need to process this with someone who understands trauma and manipulation. And she had. Caroline had referred her to a therapist who specialized in abuse victims and trauma recovery. Emily had her first session 3 days after the confrontation, and it had been harder than she expected. Sitting in the therapist's office, recounting everything that had happened, Emily had to confront how close she had come to actually breaking down. If she hadn't found those photos when she did, if she hadn't documented everything so carefully, David and Patricia might have succeeded in completely destroying her credibility and her sense of self. What you experienced was sophisticated psychological manipulation, her therapist, Dr. Reed, had explained. Gaslighting at this level, coordinated between two people, sustained over months with the specific goal of making you doubt your own perception of reality, that's calculated abuse. It's going to take time to recover your sense of trust, both in others and in yourself. Emily had worried she would fall apart in therapy, but instead she felt stronger after each session. Dr. Reed helped her see patterns she had missed, ways David had been controlling and manipulative even before Patricia entered the picture. The relationship had never been as healthy as Emily thought. She had just been too trusting, too willing to see the best in him, to notice the red flags. Meanwhile, the legal case was progressing rapidly. David had hired his own attorney, and there had been attempts to negotiate a settlement, but Emily refused. She wanted this to go through the courts. She wanted an official record of what had been done to her.
Patricia had apparently gone underground. According to David's father, she had quit her job and left town shortly after the confrontation. David claimed not to know where she went, but Emily suspected he was lying. Either way, Caroline had filed a civil suit against Patricia for the damages caused by her actions, and they were working with the police to track her down for the identity theft and fraud charges. David's employer had launched their own investigation after learning about the attempted theft of Emily's money and the extent of David's deception. Emily didn't know all the details, but she had heard through mutual acquaintances that David had been placed on administrative leave while the company reviewed whether his actions violated any corporate ethics policies. Watching David's life unravel should have felt satisfying, but mostly it just felt sad. Emily kept thinking about the man she had believed she married. Kind, stable, trustworthy. That man had never existed. She had been in love with a fiction, a performance David had maintained just well enough to keep her trapped in the relationship while he pursued what he actually wanted with Patricia. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Emily returned to work. She had told Marcus she needed to get back to her routine, to start rebuilding her normal life. Her first day back was nerve-wracking. She worried that everyone would stare at her, that she would be defined forever as the woman who was gaslighted by her husband and his mistress. But her coworkers surprised her. Several pulled her aside to express support. Others simply treated her normally, asking about her time off without prying into details. Marcus had apparently briefed the staff on maintaining professionalism and respecting Emily's privacy, and it had worked. Standing behind the reception desk again, checking in guests and handling the familiar routine, Emily felt a sense of reclamation. This was her space. David and Patricia had tried to take this from her by sabotaging her work performance, but they had failed. She was still here, still competent, still the person she had always been. During her lunch break, Emily sat in the hotel cafe with her phone, scrolling through messages. There was one from David's father, checking in on her. One from Jessica, sending encouragement. One from Caroline with an update on the legal proceedings. And one from David. Emily stared at her phone, debating whether to open it. Caroline had told her she didn't have to communicate with David outside of legal channels, but curiosity won out. She opened the message. Emily, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to understand something. What Patricia and I did wasn't right, I know that now, but it wasn't meant to hurt you the way it did. We just wanted to be together and couldn't figure out another way. I'm sorry for how things ended. I hope eventually you can forgive me. Emily read the message 3 times. Then she deleted it without responding. There was no apology in those words, not really. Just excuses and rationalization. David was sorry things had ended, sorry he got caught, but he wasn't actually sorry for what he had done. He still didn't understand, or didn't want to understand, the magnitude of the harm he had caused. Emily blocked his number. Whatever David needed from her, forgiveness, understanding, absolution, she had none of it to give. He had made his choices. Now he would live with the consequences. That evening, Emily sat in her living room, no longer their living room, but definitively hers, and took stock of where she was. Her marriage was ending. Her life had been upended. She had been betrayed by someone she trusted completely and manipulated by someone she had welcomed into her home. But she was still standing. She had fought back and won. She had protected herself, documented the truth, and refused to accept the false narrative that David and Patricia had tried to create. She had survived something designed to break her. More than survived, she was beginning to rebuild. Emily pulled out a notebook and started making lists. Things she wanted to do now that she was free. Places she wanted to travel. Career goals she had put off because they didn't fit into the life she had been living with David. A new apartment maybe, a fresh start, in a space that held no memories of her failed marriage. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in months, it also felt like it belonged to her. The doorbell rang, interrupting her planning. Emily checked the camera feed on her phone. She had upgraded the security system after changing the locks and saw David's father standing on her porch. She opened the door, surprised. Mr. Carter, I wasn't expecting you. I know. I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. I tried calling, but I think you had your phone on silent. Do you have a few minutes? She stepped aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, and Mr. Carter looked around the space with a sad expression. I'm selling my house in Arizona. I've been thinking about it for a while, and after everything that happened, I realized I don't want to be so far from the people I care about. That's a big decision, Emily said carefully. I'm moving here, to this area. I want to be close enough that I can be part of stopping David from doing something like this again to someone else. I want to be able to testify in person if needed, to be available for whatever the legal case requires. He paused, but also, I want to be here for you, if you'll let me. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. Emily, you were part of my family, and as far as I'm concerned, you still are. What David did doesn't change that. You're a good person who deserves support, and I failed to protect you from my own son. Let me try to make that right. They talked for an hour. Mr. Carter shared his own grief about discovering who his son really was. his anger at being used as part of the deception, and his determination to support Emily through the legal process and beyond. He asked about her plans, her career, how she was holding up emotionally. Before he left, he gave Emily his new address, an apartment he was renting just 15 minutes away, and made her promise to call if she needed anything. "You're not alone," he said. "I know, it might feel like it sometimes, but you're not." After he left, Emily sat with those words. She had felt profoundly alone during the gaslighting, isolated by design as David and Patricia worked to cut her off from her own reality. But she wasn't alone now. She had friends who believed her, co-workers who supported her, an attorney who was fighting for her, a therapist helping her heal, and even David's father who had chosen her side over his own sons. The network of support she had built, mostly without realizing it, was strong enough to hold her while she rebuilt herself. Emily pulled out her notebook and started writing. The future was still uncertain, still scary in many ways, but it was hers to shape now, free from manipulation and lies. And that was enough to start with.
3 months after the confrontation, Emily sat in a courthouse waiting room, her attorney Caroline beside her. Today was the final hearing for the divorce and the civil case against both David and Patricia. The criminal charges for identity theft and fraud were proceeding separately, but this hearing would determine the financial settlement and officially end Emily's marriage. Emily had dressed carefully that morning, a tailored navy suit that made her look professional and composed. She had spent the previous night reviewing her testimony with Caroline one last time, though at this point she knew her own story so thoroughly that she could have recited it in her sleep. The past 3 months had been transformative. Emily had continued therapy with Dr. Reed, unpacking not just the trauma of the gaslighting, but also the underlying patterns that had made her vulnerable to David's manipulation in the first place. She had learned to trust her own perceptions again, to recognize red flags in relationships, and to value herself enough to demand honesty and respect. She had also thrown herself into her work at the Grandview Hotel. True to his word, Marcus had promoted her to assistant manager, a position that came with more responsibility, better pay, and renewed purpose. Emily discovered she was good at management. Her attention to detail and ability to read people served her well in overseeing operations and training staff. The work kept her busy and gave her something positive to focus on during the long months of legal proceedings. David's father, true to his word, had moved to the area and become a constant source of support. He and Emily had lunch every week, a routine that had surprised both of them with how comfortable it felt. Mr. Carter treated Emily like the daughter he had always wanted, and Emily found in him the parental figure she had been missing since her own parents died. Their relationship was one of the few unambiguously good things to emerge from the wreckage of her marriage. Patricia had been found. She had fled to another state and changed her name, but the private investigator Caroline hired had tracked her down. She was currently facing both civil and criminal charges. From what Emily had heard, Patricia was trying to paint herself as a victim, claiming David had manipulated her too, that she hadn't understood what they were doing to Emily. But the evidence contradicted that narrative entirely. The recording showed Patricia had been an active, willing participant in the gaslighting campaign, often the one suggesting next steps in their psychological manipulation. David, meanwhile, had lost his job. His employer had concluded that his actions violated their ethics policies, particularly the attempted financial theft and the use of company resources to coordinate some of his deception. He had tried to find work in his field, but the story of what he had done had spread through professional networks. Emily took no pleasure in his professional ruin, but she didn't feel guilty about it either. David had made his choices, and consequences were simply the natural outcome. The courtroom doors opened and a bailiff called their case. Emily took a deep breath and followed Caroline inside. The room was smaller than she had expected, more businesslike than dramatic. David sat at a table with his attorney, and for the first time in months, Emily looked directly at him. He had aged. The confident, polished man she had married now looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. When their eyes met, David looked away first.
Patricia was at a separate table with her own attorney, appearing via video link since she was in custody in another state, awaiting trial on the criminal charges. On the screen, Emily could see that Patricia's expensive polish had faded. Her hair was pulled back plainly, her face without the careful makeup, her expression hard. The judge, a woman in her 60s with still gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the case files before calling the proceedings to order. Emily's testimony came first. She walked through the entire timeline, meeting David, their marriage, Patricia's entrance into their lives under false pretenses, the discovery of the affair, the systematic gaslighting, the documented evidence of psychological manipulation and attempted theft. Caroline presented the evidence methodically. The photographs showing the long-term affair, security footage from the hotel showing Patricia accessing restricted systems, bank records documenting the attempted theft, testimony from David's father confirming he had never been engaged to Patricia and had never had any health crisis. The recordings from Emily's home showing David and Patricia coordinating their stories and admitting to their scheme. The most powerful moment came when they played the audio from the confrontation. Emily listened to her own voice, steady despite everything, demanding answers. Then David's cold admission. The marriage was a mistake. I was with Patricia first. Patricia's chilling rationalization. We just needed you to seem unreliable. You were supposed to just accept it eventually. In the recording, Emily heard herself ask how their actions weren't meant to hurt her, given that they had destroyed her sense of reality. She heard David's matter-of-fact response. We needed you out of the way. This wasn't personal. The judge's expression grew increasingly severe as the recordings played. David's attorney tried to argue for leniency, suggesting that while David's affair was regrettable, the gaslighting had been unintentional, a misunderstanding rather than deliberate psychological abuse. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too clearly documented. The judge cut him off midway through his argument. Counsel, I've reviewed all the materials in this case, and I find your characterization of these events as unintentional to be frankly insulting to this court's intelligence, the judge said sharply. The evidence shows a calculated and sustained campaign of psychological manipulation with the specific intent of making Miss Carter appear mentally unstable. This was domestic abuse of a particularly insidious nature. Patricia's attorney argued via video link that Patricia had been manipulated by David, that she was as much a victim as Emily. But again, the recordings contradicted this. Patricia's voice on the tape showed her to be an active, enthusiastic participant, often the one suggesting ways to escalate the gaslighting. When it came time for David and Patricia to speak, David stood and offered what sounded like a rehearsed apology. I deeply regret the pain I've caused Emily. I made terrible choices and I take full responsibility for my actions. I hope that in time she can forgive me and we can both move forward. The words were empty. Emily could hear it. The judge could hear it. Probably everyone in the courtroom could hear it. This wasn't genuine remorse. It was damage control. Patricia was more defiant. I loved David, she said through the video link, her voice sharp. We loved each other. Yes, we made mistakes in how we handled the situation, but Emily was never supposed to be hurt this badly. She was just in the way of something real. Emily felt Caroline's hand briefly squeeze her arm in support. The casual cruelty of Patricia's words, reducing Emily's pain, her marriage, her entire life to being in the way, was stunning. The judge took a recess to review all materials one final time before rendering her decision. Emily waited in the hallway with Caroline and Mr. Carter, who had attended the hearing for moral support. They didn't talk much. Emily felt drained, exhausted from reliving the trauma, even though she had told this story dozens of times by now. When they recalled back in, the judge's expression was grave. I've presided over family law cases for over 20 years, and I can honestly say this is one of the most disturbing cases of domestic psychological abuse I have encountered. Mr. Carter and Miss Morrison engaged in a deliberate, coordinated effort to destroy Miss Emily Carter's mental health and credibility for their own financial and romantic benefit. This was not a crime of passion or a mistake made in difficult circumstances. This was calculated, sustained, and cruel. The judge turned to David. Mr. Carter, you betrayed every value made to your wife. You brought your mistress into your marital home under false pretenses. You systematically worked to make your wife doubt her own sanity. You attempted to steal her money. The evidence shows that you and Miss Morrison were preparing to have Miss Emily Carter potentially committed to a psychiatric facility to ensure she could not contest the divorce or expose your actions. The level of sociopathic manipulation here is truly extraordinary. David's face had gone pale. The judge then addressed Patricia on the video screen. Miss Morrison, you participated fully in this scheme. You infiltrated Miss Carter's home and life under false pretenses. You tampered with her workplace systems to sabotage her career. You helped gaslight her into questioning her own sanity. Your assertion that she was in the way demonstrates a stunning lack of empathy or understanding of the harm you caused. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. The divorce was granted immediately.
David was ordered to pay Emily full restitution for her financial contributions to the marriage, plus additional damages for emotional distress totaling $200,000. The house was awarded to Emily outright. David's retirement accounts and investments were to be divided with a 60-40 split in Emily's favor, given the circumstances of the divorce. Additionally, both David and Patricia were ordered to pay separate damages to Emily in the civil suit, $100,000 each for the psychological harm caused by their gaslighting campaign. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order barring both David and Patricia from contacting Emily in any way. Miss Carter, I want you to know that what happened to you was not your fault. You were targeted by two individuals who saw you as an obstacle rather than a human being. The fact that you recognized what was happening, documented everything so thoroughly, and had the courage to fight back is remarkable. I hope this ruling provides some measure of justice and allows you to move forward with your life. Emily felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were relief, validation, the emotional release of finally being believed and vindicated by an official authority after months of gaslighting had made her doubt her own reality. Caroline hugged her as they left the courtroom. Mr. Carter was waiting in the hallway, and he embraced Emily tightly. I'm proud of you. So proud of how you handled all of this. David left the courthouse quickly, his head down, his attorney guiding him toward a side exit. Patricia's video link had been disconnected immediately after the ruling. Emily didn't watch them leave. She was already thinking ahead to what came next. The legal victory was important, crucial even, but Emily knew the real work of recovery was internal. She had spent 3 months rebuilding her sense of self, learning to trust her instincts again and establishing a life that was entirely her own. The judge's ruling validated what Emily already knew. She had been wronged terribly, but she had survived, and she was stronger for it. In the weeks following the hearing, Emily threw herself into the future she had been planning. She redecorated the house, removing every trace of David and Patricia, and creating a space that reflected her own taste and personality. She hung art she'd always loved but David had vetoed. She bought furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive. She created a home office where she could work on her growing responsibilities at the hotel.
She also started dating again, though cautiously. Dr. Reed had helped her understand the patterns that had made her vulnerable to David's manipulation, and Emily was determined not to repeat them. She went on casual dates with a few different people, learning to trust her instincts about who was genuine and who wasn't. She was in no rush to find another serious relationship. For now, she was focused on enjoying her own company and building the life she wanted. The financial settlement from David and Patricia gave Emily options she hadn't had before. She invested some of it, saved some for future plans, and used some to take the trip to Europe she had always dreamed about. She spent 2 weeks traveling through Italy and France, alone but not lonely, reveling in the freedom to go where she wanted and do what she pleased without having to consider anyone else's preferences. It was in a small cafe in Paris, sitting with an espresso and a croissant while sketching the scene around her, that Emily realized she had truly moved past what David and Patricia had done to her. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She was Emily Carter, survivor, hotel manager, friend, daughter figure to Mr. Carter, artist in her spare time, traveler, someone who had been knocked down and gotten back up stronger. When she returned from Europe, Emily made a decision. She sat down and wrote out her entire story, all of it, from meeting David to the final court hearing. She wrote it as a warning and as a therapy, pouring everything onto the page. When she finished, she felt lighter. She shared the story on a blog dedicated to survivors of emotional abuse and gaslighting. She didn't use real names, changed identifying details, but kept the essential truth intact. Within days, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Emily received messages from people who had experienced similar manipulation, thanking her for putting words to their experiences, for showing that it was possible to fight back and survive. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Claire who wrote, "I've been with my husband for 5 years, and your story made me realize that the forgetfulness and confusion I've been experiencing isn't me going crazy, it's him making me think I am. I'm going to start documenting everything just like you did. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone and that there's a way out." Emily responded to Claire with resources, encouragement, and the contact information for Caroline's law firm. Helping others who were trapped in similar situations gave Emily's experience meaning beyond her own survival. She became an advocate, speaking at local domestic violence organizations about psychological abuse and gaslighting, helping people understand that abuse doesn't always leave physical scars, but can be just as devastating. 6 months after the court hearing, Emily received news that Patricia had been convicted on criminal charges and was serving a 2-year sentence followed by probation. David had accepted a plea deal on lesser charges and received probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The criminal justice system had done its part, adding official consequences to the personal and financial ones they had already faced. Emily felt only distant satisfaction at the news. She had moved beyond needing revenge or even justice in the traditional sense. She had rebuilt her life into something better than it had been before, and that was the real victory. One evening, Emily invited Mr. Carter, Jessica, Marcus, and a few other close friends to our house for dinner. She had cooked a feast, Italian recipes she had learned during her trip to Italy and France. And as they sat around her dining table, laughing and talking, Emily felt a profound sense of contentment. This was her family now, not bound by blood or legal obligation, but by choice and genuine affection. These were people who had stood by her during the darkest time of her life, who had believed her when she might not have fully believed herself, who had celebrated her victories and supported her through her struggles. After everyone left, Emily stood in her kitchen washing dishes, looking around at the life she had built. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was full of her own presence, her choices, her personality. She thought about the woman she had been when she first suspected something was wrong in her marriage, that terrified version of herself who had found photos in David's office and felt her reality crumble. That woman was strong enough to investigate, brave enough to gather evidence, determined enough to fight back even when everything seemed designed to make her give up. Emily hoped that woman would be proud of who she had become. Because Emily had done more than survive David and Patricia's betrayal. She had transformed it into fuel for becoming someone stronger, wiser, more authentic. She had learned to trust herself implicitly, to recognize manipulation when she saw it, to value truth and honesty above comfort or convenience. She had learned that she was enough, not because someone else loved her or validated her, but because she had proven to herself that she could face the worst kind of betrayal and come out the other side whole. Not changed, but not broken either. Remade into someone who knew her own strength. Emily dried the last dish and turned off the kitchen lights, heading upstairs to her bedroom. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a big project at work, a therapy session to continue processing her experiences, plans to meet with other abuse survivors who wanted to hear her story. But tonight, Emily could rest in the knowledge that she had reclaimed her life completely. She had been gaslighted, manipulated, and betrayed by the people closest to her. But she had fought back with intelligence, courage, and determination. And she had won, not just in court, but in the deeper, more important battle to maintain her sanity and sense of self. As Emily drifted off to sleep in her own home, in her own bed, with her own hard-won peace of mind, she realized this was what victory looked like. Not dramatic or glamorous, but quiet and certain and absolutely real. She had survived. She had healed. And she had built a life that was entirely, authentically hers. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.